Welcome back to another new podcast from the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, news editor with the AMP Publications team. In that role, I create content for both Materials Performance Magazine and Coatings Pro Magazine, both of which are member magazines of AMP. AMP, of course, is an acronym for our association. Today, we're joined by Wynn Darden, business manager for LUMIFLON fluoropolymer resins at AGC Chemicals. Wynn, thanks so much for taking the time. Can you go ahead and give some details as to your career biography to our audience, along with some details of your current role with AGC?
Sure, Ben. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it. I'm Wynn Darden. I'm the business manager for the LUMIFLON fluoropolymer resins for North America. I've been in the selling either paint and coating raw materials or coatings for 35 years now, so quite a background in it. I started my career in the lab, chemical lab, where I have 12 U.S. patents.
So as far as LUMIFLON, I think a good place to start the conversation would be by explaining what it is. Because I know your products, you go to the website, lumiflonusa.com, you've got solvent-based products, you've got water-based, you've got solids, you've got powders. Just explain at a high level what it is and how it works in tandem with coatings.
Okay. Yeah, LUMIFLON resins were developed in Japan in the early 1980s. It was really an attempt to develop a fluoropolymer that could specifically be used in coatings. Most fluoropolymers, while they're very inert and don't decompose rapidly, are not able to be used in coatings because they're not soluble in anything or can't be made compatible with water. LUMIFLON is basically a fluorinated polyol. So if you think of polyurethane chemistry, where you cross-link a polyol with an isocyanate, what we're doing with LUMIFLON is we're cross-linking a fluorinated polyol with an isocyanate. Because of the fluoropolymer in the and because of the polymer structure of the product, the LUMIFLON coatings have ultra weatherability, ultra durability. That is, they will retain gloss and color when they're applied and used in the field. Will retain gloss and color for 30 plus years, depending on the environment. So they're very durable, very corrosion resistant, very low color change, and very low gloss retention. Our customers are paint companies, paint manufacturers. That's who we mostly sell to. LUMIFLON, again, is used in coatings, unlike a lot of other fluoropolymers, so specifically developed for that market.
So you've got a very helpful website, which I mentioned already, lumiflonusa.com, where there's all sorts of additional resources, a blog, a podcast series, which we'll talk about, technical specifications. But when you look at markets, which is where I think we should start our conversation today, we looked at products initially. Now, in terms of markets that LUMIFLON plays in, you've got architecture, you've got bridges, you've got water tanks and infrastructure, you've got transportation. Just speak a little bit more to the types of projects that you all are involved in, where you provide solutions, and also globally what the reach is.
Okay. Yeah, we're market segments for us. The largest market segment is architectural, and we serve that through a number of different products. We have a powder coating resin that is used in the on aluminum extrusions for windows and curtain wall on very large projects like the Hudson Yards project in New York City. So these would be high-rise office buildings or high-rise residence. We've done quite a bit actually in New York City. We also, with our solvent-based materials and with our solid resins, which can be used to make zero and low VOC coatings, we also serve that market, but from a repainting aspect. So if you have, for example, a roof that has been coated in the past, but the coating is degraded, LUMIFLON is also often used to repaint that roof. So these can be applied in the field as well. We also have a product that goes into coil coatings, and these are primarily used on aluminum composite panels. Applications for that, if you drive past a Toyota dealership or a Nissan dealership, you'll see the metallic coated panels that are on the dealership, those are for the most part LUMIFLON. We also sell to the industrial maintenance market. This would be things like water tanks, bridges, any structure you don't want to repaint very often. We have a bit of business in the aerospace coatings. There are several of the aircraft in the Air Force that use LUMIFLON. It extends their repainting cycle. Instead of having to repaint once every 3 years, they can repaint once every 7 years. So we're in that, and we do a little bit of business in the automotive industry.
So as far as your end users, are there any common questions or observations that you get from them when they're looking at LUMIFLON resins to potentially be part of their project, or a coatings manufacturer for that matter? What do you hear from your end users as far as what their, I guess, common themes, questions, observations may be when they're looking at actually using your resins on a project?
Yeah, they're the paint companies, of course, are interested in servicing their customers,
Right.
which are people like building owners or architects or engineers. In the case of a bridge, maybe a bridge engineer. So we're kind of one step removed from the ultimate customer. But in general, what people are looking for is they're looking for higher durability. When you look at something like repainting a bridge, the cost is not necessarily associated with the cost of the coating. It isn't necessarily driven by that. In a lot of cases, the cost of the coating and the direct cost of application is only about 10% of the final cost. The rest of it is in things like removing the old paint, sandblasting down to bare metal, staging, blocking traffic, all sorts of things that go on when you're repainting a bridge. So we try to emphasize the longevity of the materials because you don't have to do that as often if you use our LUMIFLON product or LUMIFLON coating. So there's a real benefit for the customer. We try to emphasize in our process of selling to them, we try to emphasize the life cycle cost advantages of LUMIFLON over standard coating materials. Because the coatings will last for 30 plus years, you basically, you miss a painting cycle. Most coatings would have to be recoated around 15 or 20 years. With LUMIFLON, you can get out to that 30-year time period. So over the course of that, you're going to have to repaint with a competitive material. With LUMIFLON, you won't have to do that. So the environmental advantages that does, you don't have to make more coating, you don't have to apply more coating with solvents that get into the air and things like that. So that's really what drives our business is when the markets start to think, and the end users of the coatings, so our customers start to look at durability and start to really look at life cycle costs.
So you mentioned the bridge market, and that's a good example of one that is really changing quickly, because the last couple of years with the infrastructure bill and the opportunities that arise from that, you're seeing a lot of activity when it comes to projects in that market. What are you seeing in terms of changes to your markets, and how is LUMIFLON preparing to be ready for those changes in the future?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest factor driving our markets is environmental considerations.
Mm-hmm.
As things like CO2 emissions and sustainability come into play, people are more willing to look at going back to the architectural market, for example. We compete primarily against liquid coatings for curtain wall or windows. These are factory applied materials. So these are not applied in the field, but for factory application. But when you apply a solvent-based fluoropolymer to an aluminum extrusion, while the weatherability of these materials is very good, just like LUMIFLON, you're having to burn off a lot of solvent. So your CO2 emissions are very high for these liquid coatings. With powder coatings, you don't have any solvents to deal with. And, everything that you see goes on to the to the part. There's really no waste involved with it. You can recycle coating if the coatings are applied electrostatically in the powder market. You can recycle any coating that doesn't stick to the extrusion. So the application efficiency can be greater than 90% for powder coatings. And those are things that architects are very interested in. They want to move away from solvents, and they want to know what type of waste stream are you creating at the end of it. And because of that, powder coatings are gaining in market share in that architectural market. So I think that's the biggest part. We sell into the industrial market or the field application market. We sell more and more of our solid resins. These materials are blended with VOC exempt solvents, so they can meet all of the VOC standards in the U.S., including those for the South Coast Air Quality Management District down in Southern California. So those sales are increasing. We still sell a lot of solvent-based materials and water-based materials, but the solid resins are gaining a lot more traction now because they minimize the emission of VOC into the environment.
So I know as a provider of materials, at the end of the day, your materials are only as good as they're applied. You can have the right material, but if it's not installed in the correct way, then it's not going to perform its intended mission. So obviously you want your products to be end user friendly. You want things to be easily understood. And as mentioned, that's why your website has all these additional resources on there. That's part of why you go that extra mile to be a resource. But also, I think it's important to be up to date with new technologies. So are you seeing anything in terms of new strategies or new technologies for application equipment, or things that are happening on the material side to better use the equipment that's already in place? Are you seeing anything on the technology side that's changing the market now or expected to change the market over the next few years?
Yeah, I think as far as application goes, you're exactly right that the coating, no matter what the quality of the coating, is only as good as the people who are applying it. Most of our customers will use a qualified applicator. So these will be people that they have vetted and talked to. They've seen their facilities. They've watched them work out in the field, so that they're certain that they're going to do a good job in applying the LUMIFLON coatings. One of the other things with LUMIFLON is it does use standard application equipment. You don't have to use specialized equipment. So the contractors will have the equipment already available. They don't have to invest in anything new. Really, in the new materials, I think what's going to drive a lot of our market is the powder coating market is probably the one with the largest growth. After that will be the industrial maintenance field applied market. And again, most of that's environmentally driven. As I said, we can use those our customers can use those VOC exempt solvents, so they're not really putting anything into the air that's going to cause smog formation. So that's a big advantage of that. But I think the powder is something that we're counting on to move ahead with that, and that's because the architects are more and more green in their outlook on the design.
So I've mentioned a couple of times the resources you have available at the website. One of those is the podcast page. And you've got this series called In the Mix, where you talk to a range of experts from really throughout the coating industry. We'll get into some highlights in a little bit, but I want to start with the origins of the program. Why was that a worthwhile venture for you all, besides the technical specs, the documentation, all the usual things that you will see on a material manufacturer's website? Why is launching a podcast series and, I suppose, making yourself something of a thought leader in this space so important to you all and ultimately what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think people differ in their desire of how they choose to get information. And there's a lot of people these days that podcasts are something that they do all the time and they listen to all the time.
Right.
So we're really kind of moving the information that we offer to the market, moving it out of, say, the web the web page and trying to move it into a more of a listening mode, so the customers or the potential customers can get that media the way that they want it. We do a lot of webinars. In fact, we just did one with AMPP this spring. And we think there are big advantages to doing that. Is of course the first thing is you kind of pre-screen your audience. Right. If someone is willing to spend an hour with you on a webinar, it means that they have an interest in coatings. So we do that. We do online promotion and email blasts and things like that. But the podcasts are something that we think has got a good future in it. What we try to do is to try to educate the market. So we're trying to bring in not only our customers who are the paint suppliers or coating suppliers, but we're also bringing in architects who actually work with the coating manufacturers. We're bringing them into it because it's interesting to hear other viewpoints other than my viewpoint as a raw material manufacturer or our customer's viewpoint as a coating manufacturer. People are interested in how do architects come around to, for how do they hear about a material like LUMIFLON? How does it affect the way that they write a specification or a standard? So we want to include as many people in that value chain as we can, because it gives people a better idea of how this market works. And, the type of information, the type of things that happen in the market.
Yeah, and as someone that operates in the podcast space, I think you have a good understanding of how to leverage podcast and how to leverage webcast or webinars, because I often get that question from folks in the industry. When does a webinar make sense? When does a podcast make sense? And honestly, the audiences are fairly different in that the webinar, as you mentioned, that's great for an audience that's very targeted. Someone that signs up for an hour-long presentation. Now, granted, there is an on-demand version, but that's typically to better engage with an audience that's already there, that's already familiar with or interested in your products. And that's a way that you can make the presentation, if you will. You can get very detailed in terms of the graphics, the images, whatever it may be, to engage and sort of get them to take that final step to really close the sale, if you will. As opposed to the podcast typically it's a lot more bite-sized, 20 to 30 minutes, and it's a way to sort of be the doorway into eventual conversations at a deeper level, such as the webinar. The podcast is the window. The podcast is the door. And so you want it to be accessible. You want it to be on a wide variety of platforms. Yours are available on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and so on and so forth. But also, you want to be able to bring in quality guests from outside your company, which you all have, so that there's broader appeal, so that potentially you're bringing in an audience besides the folks who already know you. And so to that end, your series, LUMIFLON in the Mix, you've got some really high-profile guests from Tandem, from PPG, from Axo Nobel. You've done a really nice job with this. So when you look at the 9, so you've got 9 episodes thus far, and I know you're planning out for the rest of this year, doing basically 1 per month. What are some of the highlights that you've had in your time doing this? What has stood out to you about this series, not just in terms of the, the reasons for it, which I think we've sort of outlined already, but just in the practicality, the execution? What stood out to you so far now that you've sort of ventured into this space?
Wow, that's a tough question. Now I got to go back and remember all these things. So, I think to me the main thing for me, and of course I'm a user of this information too, but it's having the perspective of these other participants in the business, and you don't. For example, an architect may have a different reason for specifying a fluoropolymer than I thought that they would have. Mm-hmm. So to get that information from them, and I can use that information myself. We've had coating applicators. So I think we did one with powder coating applicators, and getting their viewpoint on the market, and how do they approach their marketing effort and their sales effort? What's the biggest concern for them? That helps us with our own marketing and sales efforts. Is when we understand the market better and understand the desires of people who participate in supplying that market, we become a better company, and we know where to target our efforts a little better than we did before the podcast or webinar.
Absolutely. Great insight there from Wynn Darden, business manager for LUMIFLON fluoropolymer resins at AGC Chemicals. Wynn, before we close up shop, do you have any plugs you want to throw out to our audience, and any closing thoughts as far as LUMIFLON's place in the marketplace, what your objectives are moving forward? Basically, anything else that you would like to throw out to our audience before we wind down?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the opportunity here, Ben. I think one of the things that we've noticed in the market and the industry trends out there appears to be a higher interest level in durable materials today than there was. I've been with AGC and with LUMIFLON for 20 years. And I think today there's more of a focus on durability and life cycle cost than there has been in the past. I just think that more people are adopting that, and they're starting to realize that the cost of painting is not just the cost of the paint, the resin, the dollars per gallon. It's how is the overall cost? How can I minimize that? I think one of the things we're seeing is that, for example, there are some departments of transportation that we've talked to. They can't afford to put new bridges in. In California, the new Bay Bridge, I think was supposed to be about $300 or $400 million, and it ended up costing $4 billion.
Wow.
So a lot of people can't afford to do that. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep their existing assets in service for longer periods of time. And they're also trying to minimize the downtime on those assets so that the use is not there. Whereas they don't have to repaint that every 15 years, that they can keep that bridge open for 30 years without having to worry about it. And so that, I think, is something that's happening in all of the markets that we deal in. And again, I think you're right about the infrastructure. States and federal government are putting money into infrastructure. So there's really a move toward using more durable and higher quality materials than there has been, say, 20 years ago when I started.
Yeah.
And of course, our goal for this is we want to continue to be the world's largest manufacturer of thermoset fluoropolymer coatings for all of the markets that we're in: architectural, industrial, everything that we supply. And we'll continue to do that. We'll make investments to continue that position that we have.
And as a quick follow-up to that, so you're in an interesting spot in that some of the upfront costs can be a little higher relative to the more traditional systems. And so I'm sure initially it can be a little bit awkward to have conversations with potential users. However, the case you're making, and of course there's a lot of validity to it for the reasons that you've been laying out, is that you're going to save potentially a ton on the back end because you're not having to come up with an entirely new asset 15 years from now. You can keep your current system in place longer. So what is that balance like when you're having these conversations and your system, it's undoubtedly a little more expensive than some of the cheaper options, if you will, some of the more traditional solutions, but at the end of the day, you can sort of recoup the savings on the back end and then some. What's the balance like when you try and have those conversations?
Yeah, that's it's something that we try to emphasize. What's really important is when you're pricing a project, coating project, it's the applied cost of the coating. You have to make sure that the client or the customer or the engineer or the architect understands the fact that the coating is not what's going to break you. Even if the coating is $400 a gallon and the competitive material is $50, if you double or triple the life of that coating, you're going to minimize the overall cost, applied costs of that coating system on that structure, whatever that is. Another way to look at this is to look at, let's say, the applied cost in dollars per square foot. Well, okay, that's a pretty good measure of it, and there are some advantages to a long life coating with that. But if you start to look at the measure of dollar applied cost in dollars per square foot per year, that brings that even more into focus, because that's really what it costs you to own that coating. The Department of Transportation, the Bridge Authority, the Water Authority that owns a water tank, that's how much it costs them to own that coating in dollars per square foot per year. So that's what we try to get people to focus on, is to get them to look out into the future and then to say, this is, it doesn't cost me as much to own that coating. And because of that, it minimizes the amount that it costs me to run that or have that infrastructure in place every year over the life of that material.
Makes perfect sense. All right, we will bring things to a close right there. Again, excellent insight from Wynn Darden, Business Manager for LUMIFLON Fluoropolymer Resins at AGC Chemicals. And if you want more resources from them, as mentioned, you can go to the website, LUMIFLONUSA.com. But I think perhaps the best resource of all is that podcast page where you can go and access 9 episodes and counting. I believe they're updating once every month or so. All right, that'll do it for our discussion today. On behalf of us here at AMP, I'm Ben Dubose, and if you want more resources from the association or our publications within AMP, just visit amp.org, ampp.org, coatingspromag.com, or materialsperformance.com. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another new episode.